Hey, everybody. We're just going to wait a moment or so for more folks to filter in. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll get started shortly. All right. Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Welcome to our third annual Field Inclusive Week. We are so excited for you to meet our panelists momentarily. My name is Miranda Jacoby. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an independent animator making short films about environmental issues impacting birds. I volunteer with Field Inclusive, a young nonprofit working towards amplifying and supporting marginalized and historically excluded biologists and researchers who professionally work in the outdoors. Just so you are aware, today's webinar will be recorded and recordings will be posted to our YouTube channel throughout the week. So be sure to follow us there for easy access to these recordings again. Be sure you also tune in for the entirety of this webinar to be entered to win a Sfurnace Organization and Field Inclusive prize pack valued at $120. The winner will be announced at the end. Shortly, I will introduce our panelists. But first, Field Inclusive would like to recognize and give special thanks to our sponsors of Field Inclusive Week 2025, the Nature Conservancy, NC Chapter, the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, Advanced Geo Partnership, the Sierra Club, NC Chapter, and 3 individual sponsors. Thank you for coming on board as our sponsors for FI Week this year and for being dedicated to promoting and supporting more inclusive outdoors. It is through organizations like yours and many individuals who donate to support Field Inclusive's mission that we can continue our goals in raising awareness when it comes to social safety issues when it comes to field social safety issues by hosting events like Field Inclusive Week, as well as providing financial support to our panelists, speakers, and marginalized and historically excluded individuals who professionally work outdoors. All right. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. Kelsey Jennings, pronouns she and they, is a PhD student at the Dyess Human Dimensions Lab at Virginia Tech, where they focus on equitable and sustainable wildlife conservation. Collaborating with the National Audubon Society and the U.S. Forest Service, Kelsey researches sustainable maple syrup production, emphasizing support for underserved landowners and bird conservation. Kelsey's work spans diversity, equity, inclusion, participatory science, and support for state fish and wildlife agencies. With experience as an environmental educator, bird trainer, and outreach specialist, they are passionate about expanding access to conservation and outdoor recreation. Dyess Harp, pronouns she and her, has conducted fieldwork across the Americas and Europe, focusing on animal behavior, disease ecology, and conservation. Driven by a deep fascination with wildlife and a commitment to solving ecological challenges, she also works to make ecology more inclusive for LGBTQ+ individuals and people with disabilities. As a Fulbrighter to Chile this year, Dyess aims to continue addressing ecological problems in ways that conserve ecosystems while enhancing the lives of the people who interact with them. Byron Levan, him, is an environmental consultant specializing in rare flora, fauna, and natural communities of the southeastern United States and beyond. His career has encompassed roles in natural resource education, research, and data collection. In 2023, Byron co-authored The Forest That Fire Made, an introduction to the longleaf pine forest, published by the University of Georgia Press. Byron is currently a resident of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. A huge welcome and special thanks to our panelists today for agreeing to be a part of today's conversation. We have several prepared prompts for our speakers. However, audience members, please feel free to submit your own questions in the chat. We'll have an open Q&A portion towards the end of the discussion. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into our conversation. All right, so starting us off, the first question is, what initially inspired each of you to pursue a career? Let me retry that. What initially inspired each of you to pursue a career in natural resources? My apologies. Let's start with Kelsey.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I think I have always been a person who has really enjoyed just being outside, being able to be part of the natural world. But I also think as I got older, I felt like natural resources is a good place to go where you can really be fully yourself. I'm a non-binary person, and so the ideas around gender in the field are very different when you're in a natural resource environment than if you were to, say, be in a corporate office environment. So I feel like this combination of just a lifelong love of squatting in the mud combined with it being sort of this more generally welcoming place especially nature is a place where you can be whoever you want to be, but obviously there are social structures that can make it more challenging. But just in general, having a place that is a little bit more fuzzy around the lines of gender was something that really made me really interested in natural resources as a career.
I am so sorry. Thank you so much. Let's go to Dyess next.
Hello, thanks for being here again, like Kelsey said. So I think what initially drew me to being in the natural resources is that I grew up in Appalachia, and I feel like in Appalachia, you're really lucky in that you're always so close to nature. I feel like I was always just one door away from being in the outdoors. And I feel like you get to interact with so many cool animals and everything like that just existing in Appalachia. But I feel like what really cemented it for me was my dad gave me some of his old Nat Geo magazines, and like I read those until they fell apart as a kid. And I like, as I started to grow up and especially deciding what I wanted to do in college, I bounced around to a couple of different ideas, but I feel like I really wanted to help the planet and help people. And I felt like by working in ecology, I could really do both of those very well. And so that's why I've gone down this specific path.
Thank you so much. All right, let's move on to Byron.
Yeah, so I think I just was, I don't know, as a kid, I was very into nature, and I was very fortunate to have a family that was very supportive of that. So I think it's kind of hard to narrow down like any particular person, because my mom, my dad, my aunt and uncle, grandparents all were pretty supportive in different ways. So I think, I followed my interests differently than they maybe would have thought I was going to. It wasn't the typical hunting sort of thing, but followed that. And then as I got older, nature really became a place of just reprieve from societal expectations. And I think, yeah, it just became my like safe space. So felt like I needed to be protective of it as the way I felt that it had kind of protected me.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. All right, moving on to the next question. In what ways has your identity shaped your perspective and experiences in nature? This can be positive, this can be negative, it can be both. Let's start with Dyess.
So I feel like my identity, how it connects to nature, I feel like bouncing off some of what Byron and Kelsey said, where when you're outdoors, I feel like you're not judged. I feel like you can be around animals and trees, and they're never going to have these like societal expectations of like, why are you wearing this or why are you wearing that? And so I feel like it's allowed me to really connect in a way that I don't think I would have connected without my specific identity. I should also clarify that I'm a trans woman and a lesbian, so that's the identity that I'm coming from. I also feel like my interest in like transitioning and everything that comes with like hormones and a bunch of changes to your body also kind of accelerated my interest in biology, because I feel like there's so many interesting things that you learn as a part of that that like directly correlates to all of the stuff you're learning with animal interaction. But yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, let's see. Let's go to Byron next.
Yeah, I think kind of back to what I was saying too. It's like I feel like I navigated nature slightly different than a lot of people, because the things that I think really sucked me into to learning were things that were also marginalized by society. So I've always like kind of had a passion for things that were considered gross by either the religion that I grew up in. So things like snakes, bats, as far as animals go. And then with plants, there's just so many like native plants that people don't even know exist. They don't care that they exist. And so I think that was all very important to me, that, these are things that kind of are experiencing similar, I wouldn't say similar, it's not a good way to put it, but experiencing discrimination from our society. And there's a lot of empathy for that. So I think that that's kind of how, like, that's sort of how I've navigated that, or yeah.
Right. Thank you so much. All right. And then we'll move on to Kelsey.
Yeah, I think I just want to reaffirm both what Dyess and Byron said. I feel very similarly. I think reflecting on it, my righteousness and love of nature is really what helped me come to terms with my own identities, because I had grown up as a person. I am from Minnesota originally, and Minnesota has a really strong culture around conservation and preserving natural spaces. And I think that righteousness around what the right thing to do in nature sort of started bleeding into my personal life, thinking about what is the right thing to do for people and for society. And it really made me start questioning and unlearning a lot of the societal expectations around gender and sexuality. So I think that originally it inspired me to start thinking more intensely about who I am. But I also think, being a non-binary and queer person, I think about nature in a way that's often different from the perspectives that the average person you see in natural resources might think about nature. I think there are a lot of ideas we have around the structure of how animals interact, for example, that is really rooted in heteronormativity, which is, if you're unfamiliar, the idea that everything should be straight, quote unquote straight, and cisgender, which is essentially believing that you are the gender that you were born, or feeling that you really are. Like, if you're born as assigned female, you really feel that that's who you are. And I feel like, coming from a non-binary perspective, especially, and thinking about queer relationships, it's much easier for me to take a step back from a lot of those expectations and think about how nature is a lot more queer than we've ever really given it credit. And I think that for me, it's sort of a feedback loop of helping me discover more about myself, and then helping me think more objectively about nature as well.
Yeah, I definitely see where that comes from. Thank you so much. All right. That takes us to question number 3, which is, how do the complexities of being LGBTQ+ present in your daily duties, if at all? Have you encountered any unique challenges relating to being LGBTQ+ in the natural resources? And if so, how do you address and navigate them? And let's start with Byron.
I would say that historically, yes, it probably really affected my daily duties. Like, there was so much of my personality really in general, and just my identity that I didn't share with people. So I think in that sense, like, that obviously affects your day to day. Like, I couldn't really always be myself. I was always kind of filtering what I would say, um, and that helped me in some ways navigate, like, that I don't want to do that. So um so I think now it doesn't affect me as much, in part because I don't really hide it, and I was very, very fortunate to land a job at a wonderfully supportive consulting firm. And yeah, there, like, I don't have to worry about anyone at that company, you know, questioning anything simply because of my identity, or discriminating against me based off of that either. And so I feel very fortunate, because I feel like that's not the case for a lot of people.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Next, let's go to Dyess.
So a lot of my personal experiences have been abroad. And I feel like that's created a lot of really unique challenges. I should say, like, most of the challenges that I've interacted with have been on an individual basis, and not like an institutional basis. Like, I haven't really had any problems with, like, a company that I've worked for, or like a university kind of thing. But specifically, like, being trans femme, there's a lot of difficulty when you're traveling abroad, especially when it comes to taking hormones for like transitioning. And that's really difficult to get abroad. And I feel like a lot of people would think that it would be easier to get hormones in some places like I always thought, I've worked in Panama and I've worked in Finland, and I always thought it would be way harder to get hormones in Panama, but it was super difficult to get hormones in Finland, like a multi-month battle to try to get that. And I feel like the other thing is like your passport not matching, and you show up to the airport and they're like, this looks nothing like you. Why are you like showing us the wrong passport? So those have been some daily challenges that I think I have dealt with that I don't think most people in the natural resources field are necessarily dealing with. But also through some of my field work, I've of course had challenges where like some people, didn't gender me correctly, especially as I was passing less, passing being people see me as the gender that I identify as. And that created some difficulties. And then I feel like, especially early on when I was passing less, bathrooms and where am I sleeping, and like all of these things have always been something that like created kind of a daily complexity. Yeah.
Thank you so much for telling us about your experiences. We really appreciate hearing about it. All right. And I think we've not gone to Kelsey yet, so let's go to Kelsey next.
Yeah, I think that in reflecting on this, I think the biggest thing for me on the day-to-day is that I often present my gender in different ways depending on the day. I've known Dyess for years, and I had a shaved head when we met, very short hair when we met, and I tend to move back and forth between these maybe more outwardly queer looking or outwardly non-binary looking looks, and then, for example, how I look today, where the average person on the street might not clock me as non-binary. And I think that it's been really easy for me to see how my privileges change through that process. So when I do have really short hair, people at times have been sort of antagonistic towards me, especially non-binary is an identity that's not well understood by the general public. And I think as queer and trans people are coming more into headlines, people form ideas about what it means to be queer or trans or non-binary based on headlines or articles versus people they know. So I think when I am more on that side of the spectrum, where I am looking maybe more masculine, maybe less traditionally feminine, I am sometimes treated more differently than, for example, if I show up looking like this, people think that they know exactly how to interact with me. So I think that's been the biggest daily issue I've had. I'm also a conservation social scientist, though, and I feel that because I'm a social scientist and we talk a lot about how are we going to ask questions about gender, for example, I think that there is a challenge in standing up for what I know is right. For example, how to ask people's gender. I often get pushback on, well, why can't we just say man, woman, and other, for example? And there are a lot of complexities to that I can get into if we have time towards the end. I think I don't want to go too deep into that, but I think having to be the person who's writing surveys and then also having to out myself and say, no, I'm a non-binary person. If I had a question that said man, woman, and other, I would feel uncomfortable with that. And I think that adds an added level of discomfort, where in a meeting with 30 people talking about a survey, I have to say, no, this is how we should be writing the question based on all of this literature, and also as my personal experience. But I also feel very lucky that I'm privileged to have the support of the lab that I work in to be able to stand up if somebody were to be rude or cruel in a meeting like that. I know that I have people backing me up.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. Yeah, you do raise a lot of points about whose duty is it when teaching about these concepts and introducing things to it. Like, is it one's own duty to be vulnerable? How do we address that and navigate that? And I think that could be a really good thing to come back to a little later. So let's put a pin in that. And if any audience members would like to ask a question more specifically, definitely go for it. All right. So question 4, similar to question 3. In your experiences, has your identity become a tool for you to connect with people? Does being a part of a marginalized identity change your interactions and methods of engagement with people? And if so, can you provide some examples? And let's see, I'll go to Dyess first.
So I definitely feel like my identity has given me this really cool ability to connect with a lot of people, like almost instantly. Like, I feel like, especially when you're in a field setting and you find out another person's queer, it's like, oh my God, yes, thank God you're here. And I feel like it allows me to connect like on a really deep level with a lot of different people. But of course, I mean, it does change how I interact with people, especially like within the United States when I have worked in the United States and when I come back to the United States. With everything that's happening with politics and everything, I feel like being trans is such a like targeted identity. Like we are such a big talking point for such a small like group of people. And I feel like that makes me very hesitant when I first meet people. I'm like very nervous, like, oh my God, what is this going to be like? And most of the time, like people don't even know I'm trans anymore, so it isn't even a problem. But it can create some like really complicated interactions. Like I've had people just straight up tell me to my face, like, oh, I don't believe in all that. I remember one time I was doing field work in Appalachia. I had like one guy with his kids threaten me, like all kinds of different interactions that I feel like have made me hesitant to interact with certain people. But I do feel like, once again, ultimately, my identity has been a blessing when it comes to connecting with people, especially like I feel like I think about on Twitter, though I know we're not using that as much anymore, and like backpacks and stuff, whenever I see a rainbow flag, it's like, oh, I feel like we can have a really good conversation and we can really connect. So I'm very thankful for that part of my identity. And then also like bouncing off of what Kelsey said earlier, I feel like the natural resources field is so full of queer people that I'm very lucky because it's like within this field, there's so many different people that I can instantly connect with. So it's been a gift ultimately.
Thank you so much. All right, next we'll go to Kelsey.
Yeah, I agree with Dyess. I think that it is such a blessing to be able to connect with people who have similar identities and similar struggles with you. And I think that as part of the LGBTQ plus community, I feel like we do a pretty good job at signaling where we are and saying, creating spaces, like for example, TWS, the Wildlife Society, has Out in the Field, I think is what it's called, but a wonderful group of people that are all queer and are all really supportive. And you see people who have had a whole career and you can talk to them about what it was like when they started. And I think that's really incredible. I think more personally for me, I am quite open with my identity and I feel very good that I have the ability and very privileged that I have the ability to be that open. So I often, when I'm guest speaking in classes or guest teaching, will often allude to the fact that I am queer. And I think being open has allowed me to build more relationships with, especially students who are queer, who maybe I am at Virginia Tech and there are maybe not as many support structures for queer students as is maybe good. We have a wonderful group, but if you don't know where to look, it can be hard to find. So I think that being able for students to be able to see me standing in front of a classroom, giving my pronouns, talking about how my identity is interacting with how I'm engaging in the field, it's allowed me to make some really strong and wonderful connections with students. And then I also think it makes people feel that I'm approachable to ask questions. Thankfully, people who have reached out and asked questions about queer identity and how to better support their students, for example, have all been really respectful. That's not always the case. Because I do field work and my field work is talking to people in sometimes relatively remote areas. I've certainly had experiences that are not very safe. People, sort of like Dyess mentioned, saying, I don't believe in that, or seeing the gender question and being belligerent about it. I have at times felt very, very uncomfortable in that situation, and that makes it more challenging. But I've also been able to make really wonderful connections with people who have said, wow, I've never seen non-binary as an option on a survey before. This is incredible. So I think living out loud, for lack of a better way to put it, has allowed me to make some really wonderful connections, even though there have at times been downsides.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. All right, and I don't think we've been to you, Byron, yet with this question, so I'm handing it over to you.
Yeah, I would say that it has been a tool to connect with people, and I don't want to sound, I don't know how old Dyess or Kelsey are, so I don't want to sound patronizing, but I think part of the thing for me too, though, is that I feel like a lot of these connections are easier to make when you are in undergrad or early in grad school. And so we've come a long way in acceptance in LGBTQ, like person. So it's one of those things where I feel like I'm just now starting to make some of those connections really well, through things like Field Inclusive, through things like out in the field, through things, yeah, like I feel like all those things have really popped up in the past like 5 years that have really made connecting a lot easier. Now that's not to say that like historically, if I knew someone was gay and I was, and we would kind of be able to talk about that, there was an immediate bond because we both experienced similar things, and I think that that is a tool to be able to connect with people. But I think the other thing that's kind of important now is that as a white man, a gay white man, I have a lot of privilege still. So I'm able to. I think I'm able to connect with people, but it's also an important responsibility to be an ally because. There's even now, especially with the incoming administration and everything that's going on, like there is so much misogyny directed at people with like more feminine identities, and gay men who are less who like are traditionally seen as more effeminate. Those people get more of the direct I don't know, animosity, and people feel more emboldened to attack them. And I have been able to avoid a lot of that. And so I think it is a tool to outreach, but it's also my identity is a tool to help be an ally to others in the field. And I think that's also a really important part of that kind of question is, yeah, it's a great way to connect with people, but not always in like the fluffy, friendly manner. Sometimes it's in the like, okay, we have to actually take care of other folks within our community. Because I mean, I don't know it. Not to get on a long tangent, but for years there were things like on Reddit where I found a lot of community, not in wildlife, but just in general. Some subreddits that helped me kind of navigate my identities, and watching those subreddits of gay men turn really transphobic was really disheartening. So I think being able to connect with people, but also be able to acknowledge that there is privilege, and it's important to connect with people and explain why they have to have that community in our field, because it's not always there are even people within our community who are not always making positive connections with their identities because they also are discriminatory. So yes, sorry, that was a long answer.
You brought up a lot of important points. It's important stuff to talk about. There's lots of difficult things in navigating all of this. Yeah. Semi-related question. Our next one is, have you found a sense of community within your chosen field of work? And if so, what steps did you take to build that support network? Can you give some examples of the people, places, and/or resources that have been most significant to you? And I'm sorry. Additionally, how has having a sense of belonging in community or the lack thereof like influenced your academic and career paths? So these are all again related things. But let's see. Let's go to Dyess first.
So I feel like, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I have found this strong sense of community within ecology and the natural sciences. I can definitely attest to some of what Byron was saying with seeing some queer people shift to being more transphobic, but I think that largely the community is really, really supportive. And I have gotten to meet like some of the most amazing people ever. Like I met one of my best friends, Arik Norford, in Colombia, working with bats down there. And that was like so amazing because for years we've connected, and he's been like this amazing mentor and like friend with navigating everything it means to be in ecology. And that's just like someone I met by talking to them at a field station. I also feel like when I worked at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, like immediately my supervisor, Dr. Rachel Page, like connected me with so many amazing people, like the diversity director and everything like that. And that helped me figure out like navigating Panama and making friends with everyone there. So I feel like really just like talking to people and kind of I don't remember the exact wording that Kelsey used, but like living outwardly, like I am a queer person, has been a really great blessing to kind of building that sense of community. And I feel like also staying connected. Like we're all, you know, working in natural resources, everyone is super busy. I like completely understand that. But I feel like even if it's just like every 6 months, hey, how are you doing? Like that's a super great thing to do. And I feel like there was also Kelsey also talked about like unlikely allies, right? Like I am from Appalachia, and I feel like a lot of people in Appalachia, you wouldn't normally guess to be very supportive, but I've like constantly been surprised over the course of my career, how supportive people can be, even if like they don't immediately understand at first. I think the fact that they're just like willing to help you and be there for you, is great. So yeah, the unlikely allies I think is really important. Also, if you do work in field work and you're a trans person or gender nonconforming, there's also the Trans and Gender Nonconforming Fieldwork Alliance that I feel like can help you connect to so many different people, and yeah, like find community there. I also feel like when I was in university, my LGBTQ plus resource center was super important to me. Like, I feel like that helped me survive in college, and surviving in college is an important step to being in ecology. So I think that also, even if you're a grad student or an employee of a university, I feel like if your university has an LGBTQ plus resource center, they can be a great, that can be a great place to connect with people in your community.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to go to Byron next.
Okay, sorry, I'm muting myself. Yeah, I think those are all like kind of back to what Dyess said, all like really great things, and kind of back to what I was saying earlier and got lost in my own train of thought. I think I have been able to find a sense of community in my field, and some of my best friends, like one of my best friends for sure, we met at summer camp, which was like this thing at NC State University that was like the field component of our course, and I wasn't out at the time, didn't come out to her for a year till years later. But we've had a lifelong friendship since then that isn't going to go anywhere. Definitely chosen family. And I think, I think where I was going earlier is like I think some of those routes to be more open have definitely improved, and the acceptance has improved. So I think had I started earlier, I would have been able to build a stronger sense of community in the field. Because I think now I didn't come out until I was 30, and I'm 30, like in my later 30s now. So 36. So it's like I don't think that I was able to build a strong community early, and I'm working on building that community now. And I think if I would have been able to have that, I might have stayed in academia. That was my original plan. But at the time that I was in academia, I didn't have as much of a LGBTQ community. It felt kind of isolating. And there were, like, I went to our student health center, got asked why I didn't just get a girlfriend because that would be easier by the psychiatrist. So, like, I think in such a short time things have improved, and we kind of go through these cycles back and forth. So I think yes, there's the things that have been really significant now are again things like Out in the Field initiative through the Wildlife Society, Field Inclusive, and I have a very strong community of allies that, in addition to just LGBTQ people, that I think people forget. Even if things change with our administration and things coming in and like federal jobs change, we've already put in place people in those institutions that are allies. And so I'm hoping that regardless of rules and whatever, it'll be still easier to build those communities um, because we've already put people in place to make those a more welcoming space.
Thank you so much. Let's see. I don't think we've gone to Kelsey yet, so I will open the floor to you.
Thank you. I think that my experience is much closer to Byron's. I started university in 2012, and at that point there were not a lot of resources for queer folks, especially outside of like gender studies departments. I went to the University of Minnesota, which has a really wonderful department that looks at gender and sexuality, and that environment is really supportive. But for me as a person in a fisheries and wildlife department, there wasn't a lot there. I think that because of that, and in part due to some other things in my personal life, I actually took a leave of absence from university the first time I went, and spent a lot of time just trying to get back to what I like to do and to figure out how I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And it was through experiences that I was doing outside of school that really made me come to terms and helped me come to terms with my identities and look forward to how I wanted to live the rest of my life. And I think through those experiences, I was able to come back and start to build more of a community. In grad school, I helped re-up, we'll say. There was a queer grads and professionals group that had existed before, but it didn't exist when I started. And so I, with a couple of other people, started that back up again, because a lot of the resources on at least the university campuses that I have been on are really targeted towards undergraduate students who are queer and trans. And I think that that is super helpful, because when you're 18 to 22, you're quite vulnerable and you're out of your parents' house for the first time and you're really figuring out who you are. Whereas queer people who are in their, like I'm 31, queer people who are in their late 20s and early 30s probably have a different relationship with their gender and sexuality, and they need support in a different way. So that's sort of a winding way of saying, yes, I have community, but it is community that I have clawed out and really, really worked to develop. And most of it isn't in natural resources. It's either in my personal life through close friendships, or it's across a variety of disciplines. When I look at my community within natural resources, it's almost always this community of allies that Byron was talking about, which is incredibly valuable for me to have, because I don't think I would have been able to succeed to the point that I have now without having people who were in my corner and really supporting me. I mean, I know I couldn't, because I had to leave school the first time because I did not have that supportive community.
Thank you so much. All right, so we're getting a lot of really good questions in the Q&A right now, so we're going to move that up. So this was such a wonderful conversation to be a part of today, and I want to thank all of you, all of our panelists, for sharing your experiences and recommendations when it comes to inclusivity of marginalized groups, particularly LGBTQ, queer, femme, and femme presenting individuals, and the values that they all bring to this field. I would now like to open up to our audience by taking some of their questions already placed in the Q&A chat. And again, if you have a question, please place it in the Q&A chat function and share to share that with us. Right. So let's see. Okay, we have a lot of interest in this question submitted by Byron Culps. As a queer trans person, I'm often nervous when I go into a new situation with others I've never met, especially with the current climate around queerness. In this field, we spend a lot of time in close quarters or working closely with others who may not always be accepting. Do you have any tips to navigate queer identity in these spaces? Anyone who would like to answer?
I mean,
start us off.
Oh, I'm so sorry. No, you go first.
I'll keep mine quick. I think for me, just in my personal experience, the best way has been being upfront with someone I trust in the beginning. So for example, my PI is incredibly supportive, and when I knew I was going to be in situations that would put being non-binary and being queer into sort of an uncomfortable realm, I went to her and told her, this is how I'm feeling, and these are my concerns. And I'm really lucky that she responded positively to that. Other than that, I think maybe Dyess, I think you maybe have more to speak with or more to speak on with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like having someone in your corner, as Kelsey was talking about, is so important. I mean, I think part of it is like, this may not be the most helpful advice, but like being trans is hard, and being a trans woman is hard. And a lot of people say a lot of things, and I feel like the expectation and the history of that I've had has kind of like built up a resilience in me to kind of just like jump into those situations. And when stuff happened, I feel like just having communication, like, hey, it's okay if you don't understand this, but like, you know, please use these pronouns for me. And then if you do have a supervisor that's supportive, that's super wonderful, because then they can, if they can't help you solve the situation, they can kind of put you maybe in a new place where you aren't put in that uncomfortable situation. But I also like this is just a personal thing that always helps me keep going. But I think about a lot of the trans people that are older than me and that came before me that have given me the opportunity to be where I am. And I'm so thankful for them every day. And I feel like that drives me to keep going no matter what I'm going through, is thinking about them.
I think the only thing that I want to add to this is that, you know, again, as someone coming from a slightly different background and kind of being an ally in this space, like I am very fortunate in my current career and everything to have the amount of support I do. I don't worry because I don't work for like a federal agency or anything. I don't worry about having to, I'm not going to lose my job because like I'm out as a gay man or something like that. So this is kind of a non-answer to the question, but I just want to say that for other people who are trying to support, especially younger individuals in this field who might feel nervous about new situations, like one of the things that I work really hard to do is if I notice there's someone who has an identity that might fall into the queer category or like, and I can tell, especially if they're nervous or whatever, I will make sure to drop a hint about my boyfriend. I'll just say something like, "Oh yeah, like my boyfriend like texted me earlier," because I want them to know that there's someone there that is safe, that they can kind of talk to and be comfortable with. But I also don't want to dig into their personal life, so I'm not gonna like immediately say like, "Hey, like, what's your identity necessarily?" Because I don't want them to feel like they're on the spot and that they have to like out themselves to me or anything like that. And I think that's really important to note. And the opposite of the question is that if you're trying to be supportive of individuals, um, you don't necessarily have to always make an issue of it. You can find ways to like drop hints that you're supportive without being like really aggressive.
It's very thoughtful. Thank you so much. Thank you all for sharing your perspective on that. Really, a lot of really thoughtful answers there. All right. Okay, there's another question that's gotten a lot of interest, which is anonymous attendee asks, so each of you has a connection to the Southern US from your personal upbringing, academic experiences, or professional paths. The dominant cultural attitude of the South is often dismissive or antagonistic towards both science and the LGBTQ+ community. As someone born and raised in NC, I sometimes struggle with pride in my cultural background and my identity as a queer scientist. Do y'all feel any connection to the Southern identity? And if so, how do you handle it? Has working/living in the South presented any unique challenges or joys? I don't know if Byron wants to go first. I think you went last time, but anyone can, if you feel strongly about it.
Would there be a way to post that question in the chat for us?
Yes, I
It's
can
long
do
enough
that. One
that it
moment.
might. I just want to make sure I'm like hitting the actual point.
A moment, please.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting question. I kind of like Dyess, I'm from like more of the western part of the state of North Carolina. So like I am sort of Appalachia adjacent. We have like a farm in Appalachia still. That's my family's farm, and like most of my family is kind of from the Appalachia region. And it's kind of interesting because there's both this like perception that the South is really unaccepting because like politically it is, and that's what you hear about a lot. And then there's also this like sort of underlying truth that you sort of take care of your own and you really support those that are close to you. So I think for me, the part that has been interesting is trying to navigate that dichotomy more so than because if people don't like me for being gay, they don't like me for being gay. I'm not trying to win them over. I'm not trying to like, I don't really care anymore. I'm at a point in my life where it's not important to me to have that approval. So I think what I struggle with now is um how to celebrate the things and be involved in ways in Southern culture that are really valid and helpful for me, but without getting caught up in the too much in the angst towards either the culture or family, because like there's as many people as there are vocally unsupportive, there are that many people vocally supportive, I feel like, in the communities that I've been in. So I would say like struggling with that is still a problem at times, but it's also an interesting dichotomy.
Thank you. Yeah,
Oh,
let's go to
sorry.
Dyess next.
So, I mean, this is definitely something that I have thought a lot about. Like, I mean, growing up in Appalachia, I moved up and down the Appalachian Mountains. Originally raised in North Carolina, but I moved up into Virginia and then West Virginia for a little bit. And I didn't like that I was from Appalachia at first, especially when I was younger. But as I've gotten older, I think I have taken more pride in it, especially in that I feel like people in Appalachia, they may not always vote in favor of policies that help the ecosystems, but I feel like when you meet people, people always are very knowledgeable about where they live. They're very knowledgeable about their ecosystems and everything that lives within those ecosystems. And I also felt like the protect your own thing that Byron was talking about is so real. Like I've had moments where I like come out as trans to people and they're like, well, you know, we don't really like that you're trans, but you're from Appalachia, so you're one of us. And then like it's created, I guess, a space for them to actually come to understand my queer identity that I think has been really beautiful. And so I feel like to answer this question more concisely, I have found I think the really beautiful parts of Appalachian culture and Southern culture, and kind of embrace those deeply within my identity. And then I think I've left out a lot of the other more the things that I don't personally connect with, especially when it comes to like the more conservative policy. And I think that like specifically if you're looking for the kind of like alternative embracing of like Southern Appalachian culture or whatever, of that kind of region. I think that like y'alternative people, I feel like is what most of the time they call each other, is like a really great way to do that. Like I would consider myself y'alternative, but yeah.
That's my first time hearing the alternative. I'm definitely going to have to use that. Thank you. Kelsey, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, just as sort of an outsider, to be honest, I lived in Western Virginia for only a few years, and because I was looking for more in-person queer community, I actually moved. I live in Baltimore now. So I am a remote PhD student, but I think one of the most joyous experiences in living in Appalachia for a period of time is that there is no stronger place that I have seen for community organizing and community care. I think being a place that has been historically really under-resourced and overexploited in a lot of ways, there is a strong culture to take care of each other. And even in environments where I tell people I'm non-binary and they say things like, well, I don't really believe in that, it's never felt dangerous to me. It's always come with, like Dyess said, that other aspect of like, but you know, you're a person, you're here, you're part of Virginia Tech, so you're good. You're good, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. All right, next, this one got a bunch of interest as well. This comes from Tab Henry, and it reads, it can be easy to focus on the difficulties of being queer in fieldwork, but what has been the most rewarding part about being LGBTQ+ in natural resources? What positive, unique opportunities has this opened up for you, if any? Let's see. Byron, do you have anything you wanna do you wanna answer that at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that like I think just community in general of natural resources, like yes, I don't always have a huge community of like LGBTQ plus people in natural resources, um, but we're a field that is very passionate, and we're a field of a lot of people who would be considered weird. Whether it's like because we work with some animal that most people find creepy, or that we are more concerned about plants than many other things. It doesn't matter. It's like there's a sense of like we're all in it together. And I think that has been a really beautiful part. And so like I will say that like there's in many cases, the field itself has been one of the most welcoming places because people often, if they've studied biology, they understand that like there's so many different variations within like the human experience that they don't see it as like this crazy outside thing. And sometimes it's really nice because they also don't see it as something like especially shocking about you. So like there's also this like, oh, that's just who they are. And then that they move on. That's it. Like my identity doesn't have to be my only identity. Like my identity is part of me, but like also my crazy nerdiness in plants is just as exciting. Or so I think in field work, it's like yeah, that like kind of queer joy that people will talk about of like I just get to be myself and I don't feel like I really have to filter a lot in our field because if you're not going to be accepting of LGBTQ people, you're kind of an oddball.
Some really good points. Would any of our other two panelists like to add anything to that? Kelsey?
Yeah, I'd love to weigh in. I think that there's an incredible amount of positivity and joy for the same reasons that Byron listed, but also it's such a wonderful space to be in. Being able to be in nature for my job is something I never thought was possible as a child. Seeing other people in my family be like, I love nature, but I got to have a real job. So being able to have this as my real job, just first of all, is really incredible. And then beyond that, we've sort of alluded to this throughout our conversation today, but if you drop hints that you are queer, other queer people are usually so excited to meet you and talk to you and talk about your experiences. And that's true in the field, that's true in the classroom, that's true pretty much anywhere I've been throughout the natural resource environment. And I think for me, not feeling open enough to either connect with people when I was younger or have people who were willing to be open in an environment like academia or the field, seeing that shift is so joyful. I absolutely love meeting other queer people in the field. And I feel like we've all said, you just know you have a place to start from. They can understand you in a way that the typical people that you might meet in the field might not be able to, but in general, when you start with a natural resources group, they're going to have a baseline understanding or at least acceptance and willingness to chat with you and learn more.
Thank you so much. Dyess, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely agree with what both of them have said about queer people, other queer people being one of the biggest highlights about being queer. I think that's regardless of natural resources. Like, I just love queer people in general. So it's really great to meet all those people. But I feel like, I mean, for me personally, when I realized that I was queer, it's kind of like I had been wearing just like black and white glasses my whole life, and someone took off the glasses and I was finally able to see like all the colors of the world, right? Like one of the things that has made me so happy is my like new passion for like homosexual behavior in the animal kingdom and different like gender expressions. I definitely like with birds and stuff like that, you'll have some really cool like you might have two males that are both like sexually male, but they have very different like uh like oh I'm forgetting the right word, but they have very different, I guess genders is maybe not the right word, like within their culture and within their ecosystems and their behavior. And I feel like you get to see all this queerness that's in other animals that I never really thought to look at before. And so I think that you'll find the joy in the work, in the new things that it opens up your mind to see, but also in the people as they talked about as well.
Thank you so much. We do have a question about Earlier in the talk, there was a mention about a trans and non-conforming field alliance that was mentioned, and if there's any way to get connected with them, and also if there's any other South-specific resources that you could recommend. I think it was Byron. I think it was Byron that brought that up.
Oh, I brought it.
Is Dyess.
But I
it was
can, yeah,
Dyess.
I
I'm
can
so
talk about
sorry.
that. No, it's no problem at all. It's the Trans and Gender Non-Conforming Fieldwork Alliance. And if you just look that up into Google, you'll find their Twitter, you'll find their website that can connect you to the Slack where you can meet all the other people. So just look up Trans and Gender Non-Conforming Fieldwork Alliance.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. I'm going to see if we can squeeze in two more. This one comes from Molly Phillips, and it's, what is one example of allyship or support that you've experienced while doing fieldwork that has made you feel safe or seen? I'll open up the floor to Kelsey, if you have one.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is being listened to when I've brought up concerns about feeling uncomfortable in certain environments. I think a really good example for me is that I am pretty much comfortable sharing like living quarters with people of all genders, but there have been people who are a lot less comfortable sharing like bedrooms, for example, with me. So being able to open up and have these conversations with a superior or even just a mentor has been huge. So being approachable, and I think also having some cultural competency when bringing, like when talking to people and saying to my boss, like, I am non-binary, here are my concerns about being in this certain part of the field, for my boss to say, yes, I can understand why as a non-binary person, this might be an uncomfortable environment for you. That alone has been really huge. In terms of a more utility answer to that question, I think in field work, having a buddy is so valuable. There have been times where I have had to do field work alone and have gotten into situations that are a little bit nerve-wracking, a little bit uncomfortable. And I think if I'd had a buddy, I would have felt a lot more supported in that. So that's just one small quick thing I think that has made a huge difference for me in the field, but I'll open it up to see if anyone else has feedback too.
All right, thank you so much. Do either of our other panelists have something they'd like to add to that? I know we're getting a little short on time, but we have if you have something you'd like to add, we want to make sure you have the platform for that.
I can mention one real quick. So I think kind of a comical one is like the owner of the company that I work for has been an incredibly supportive person, and that's obviously very important. But like she had bought well, during like the Florida Don't Say Gay bill, she bought a cake that said "Please say gay," and I also am allergic to wheat, so I couldn't eat it. So she was like, "I know you can't eat this, but like here's some gluten-free desserts." And while we were out in the field, I kept getting updates of like people that had like eaten the cake. And then like I just get a picture where the cake had been cut and the only thing that was left, it just said gay across it. So I'm in the field, like out doing some stuff, and I just see a cake with like gay written across it. And it wasn't the intention, but it was just so comical. And it was so like wonderfully supportive in the sense that like I knew throughout the day and at the company that I was very well supported. And I think that's really important.
Thank you so much.
I feel like they have both said it so beautifully. I can just talk about personally, like I have had one of my coworkers in Finland, Katie Waring, she was like always, I feel like any time like ever had any problem, like, oh, I'm feeling kind of like dysphoric today, or oh, like I wish someone would use another pronoun for me. I feel like she just always had my back and was like willing to help me with anything like that. And I'm just so thankful for people like that. I mean, there's so many people that I could list that have been amazing allies or just like really supportive people. And I think that ecology has a lot of those people, so I'm very thankful for that.
Thank you so much. All right. This next one is going to be our last question. This is from Kat Fribley. As a queer and disabled fat femme, I know that visibility is so important in our work in conservation, nature, and outdoor spaces. Seeing others like me is always a joyful and affirming experience, and I'm curious if you've had models or other community that have supported y'all in that. Let's see.
Do you mind if I
Yeah.
take this one?
Feel free, Dyess, go for it.
So I also have a disability. I have a severe nut allergy. And that's something that's really hard in field work. Because so many people I feel like it's more in America specifically, like bring trail mix or granola bars or something with nuts, and I've had to take a step away from that. And so I have both been a trans femme person, a trans woman, and someone who's trying to get people to be okay with my nut allergy in the field. And I don't feel like I ever really had role models for either of those. Like, I feel like every place that I've been like the first trans woman. And so I feel like I'm always like kind of building a lot of the roads and structure that a lot of other people that come after thankfully get to use. I mean, I don't feel like there's been a lot of like role models in the trans community at all for kind of the people that do this kind of work. I feel like there's a stereotype specifically within the trans femme community of like, we're all programmers. And I'm like, no, I'm not a programmer. I go in the field and I hold birds, like, see me. But I'm really happy that now I've gotten to talk to a lot of other trans people that are coming after me or were there before me that I never got to meet before. And so I think that's starting to be built, but specifically for my identities, I didn't get to see any of those people, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Thank you. Oh, yep, you have the floor, Kelsey. My bad.
Thank you. I'm just going to add to that I have a very similar experience being the first non-binary person that a lot of the people I work with have worked with. And that has led to us hiring in our lab more non-binary people and collaborating with more people who are queer and gender expansive. And I think that is such an it feels incredible to be able to create an environment and help educate people in the way that needs to be done so that people who are also sharing identities with me can come into that space and feel more comfortable. But I also don't really have good role models who are older than me or more advanced than me. I have a wonderful network of peers and people who are doing incredible work, but no one who really trailblazed for me. So being that person is really important to me as well.
Thank you so much. Byron, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'll just say that I think that I think that is I'm definitely not the first gay person in the field, and I've had, I guess, a few role models. The only hard thing I will say is that some of the role models that I've had either aren't really out themselves or don't feel a strong motivation to be a role, and that's fine. Like they don't have to. No one is responsible for that. So I would say that I think it is very important to have that visibility when you can, but you also have to protect yourself. And so I think it's really good to be that role model if you are able to. It's also okay if you're not able to. So I think that's a good point to make too.
Thank you so much. All right, well, we are all out of time today, so on behalf of Field Inclusive, I would like to thank Kelsey, Dyess, and Byron once again for joining us today, and thanks for staying over for a few more questions. We really appreciate it. And again, we thank you for sharing your experiences and recommendations when it comes to the inclusivity of marginalized groups, particularly LGBTQ, queer, and femme-presenting individuals, as well as highlighting the values they bring to this field. Again, we thank those of you who joined us today, and we will continue these conversations as we further our initiatives and work when it comes to amplifying social field safety issues, as well as amplifying minorities in STEM. Please be sure to follow and interact with us on all of our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at the handle @FieldInclusive. And please also be sure to visit our website to learn more about our organization and the ways in which you as an individual or organization can support us. And now, to announce our winner for today's giveaway, congratulations to Anne McCormick. Please be sure to check your email that you registered for the webinar with to claim your prize. Be sure to check out the rest of our virtual Field Inclusive Week events. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time is our accessibility workshop, which will be given by qualified representatives who will lead a workshop focusing on accessibility, especially in the context of natural sciences and the outdoors, and focusing on practical ways to make these spaces and activities more inclusive. Registration is limited to 100 persons. When this webinar ends, you will be prompted to fill out a brief 5-question survey. Please consider offering your thoughts, as this allows us to make our future Field Inclusive Weeks even better. In the event the survey does not appear, you can always email us at info@fieldinclusive.org. We hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.